Your show's branding is the message that you give potential listeners or viewers before you've said anything. And so a lot of people skip past this part and they don't understand that this is a free employee, basically. Wherever your show shows up, if it's not branded the way that you want, it doesn't act as a beacon to call in the right people. And so a lot of people skip past this stuff and they really don't understand the significance. So in this video, for this video in the series for how to win with a podcast and grow it, I'm going to talk about how you should approach branding your show and give you some examples as to why it matters so much. Because if you get this stuff right, growth can become a lot easier, especially to the right people. Let's jump in. Okay, so you should be able to see my screen now. Let's get into it. So a lot of people just go to Fiverr, they go to Upwork, and they hire any random designer, or they make something in Canva, and they think they're good to go. The problem with doing that is that you're really underestimating the importance of how people make decisions and how they associate value with things. If something looks a certain way, people instantly make assumptions about it. There's this famous saying, don't judge a book by its cover. That saying exists because people do judge a book by its cover. And so if you're not presenting your show the way that it wants to be presented or that you want it presented, you're not having that opportunity to say things without having to say anything. And when you understand a show that gets this right, you see the significance. And it also helps a lot with growth, but I'll explain that in a little bit. Let's first start off with understanding how you should approach design. It really comes down to understanding, what do you want your show to be and who is your show for? I love this example because this guy's doing it right. Like, this guy is doing so many of the things that I've tried to explain to clients over the years, and you're seeing how important it is by the performance he's getting on his show. Okay, so his show, Area 52, is all about aliens, UFOs, very esoteric subjects. I don't care about your opinions on UFOs. That's not the point here. If you want to look at his branding, it is clearly for those kinds of people. It creates that emotion. It's leveraging off of work done by people before him. And that's really what good brand does, is if you know that over time, from people spending effort, money, and resources to make people think a certain way or to have a certain type of association to certain things, why wouldn't you leverage that to get the desired impact and emotion that you want with your branding? Okay? And so that's pretty deep level marketing, but let me explain what that means in practice. There has been so much time and money put into approaching all sort of media when it comes to aliens and esoteric subjects like this. Like, this looks exactly like a more polished version of a lot of the content that these people are very receptive to. And so if you understand the kind of things and messages and symbols that your audience really resonates with, using that in your branding, the elements of that, is a cheat code. I'm someone who likes watching content like this. When I first saw his thumbnails, I was instantly attracted to them because I could tell, and this is very, very, very important. Please listen to this. By him approaching design with this level of understanding, the chances of me as a fan of this content clicking this goes up exponentially, because without him having to say anything, I know subconsciously the chances of this video being good is way higher. Because if he understands the importance of making it look like this, it means he's been in these communities too. He's spent the time. He knows what people care about and what they don't care about. All of those things are said without saying anything. And so when you think about that at scale, right? Because all of these platforms it's just opportunities for scale. It's messaging at scale. When you think about that, think about the compounding of that over time as each person who has had similar experiences come across this content. That's why you can't just brush past your show branding and your approach to design and expect it to not have an impact. If your show is not performing the way that you want it to, it's these little things that you're not getting right that you have to. And that's why there are people with small teams who understand this that are coming in and destroying massive shows from legacy media because they don't get this. And because there's too many people working at those big ass companies that you can't even get up to speak to these people. I've been running my agency for five-ish years at this point. And with every customer that we deal with, and we've dealt with a lot more big media because people are waking up to this stuff, I'm constantly fighting 4 and 5 people who think they're experts in media, but they don't understand any of this stuff. They don't understand social media. They don't understand the opportunity of what a thumbnail can say without saying anything. They just don't get it. And so that's why you're going to see people like this continue to pop up. And that can be you. A team of one person or a team of 2 or 3 people can now achieve what previously took dozens and dozens and dozens of people if they know what they're doing. That's really what this whole channel is for, is to help and empower the smaller podcaster or the smaller team, because you can take on legacy media now. People are bored of it and they don't get this shit. And people are too concerned about just keeping their job rather than doing the right thing. And I see that every day in my agency. Every single time we onboard a new client, there's somebody I have to deal with whose job is basically convincing someone that they should have a job. That happens all the time in marketing. That's why there's so much more opportunity than you realize. Rant over. So for this stuff in particular, do you see what I'm talking about? When I'm scrolling through my For You page, or in this case on YouTube homepage, when I see any of these thumbnails, he's saying, I get it. That's what you need to be doing for your audience too. And so if you can't do that, you don't understand your audience well enough. And so let's run through the thought exercise that he or his designer probably did. Okay. So he went around and looked, okay, so what's a proven format for thumbnails? And I'm going to give you a whole another video. The next video in this series is going to be all about thumbnails in particular. We're going to start with thumbnails for main episodes, and then we're going to do thumbnails for clips. Okay. But let's get back to this. So he understood, okay, they all follow a very similar format. So what are the things that I can control? What are the levers that I can move to attract more of my right people, right? So the color grading that he used to make that feeling, right, very ominous, that's done incredibly deliberate. The color choices in general, again, creating more of that feeling. The words used, the font used, right? It's clear enough, which is incredibly important for thumbnails. It's easy to read, but it still kind of makes you feel alien-y, right? Like these are the little things that you need to be thinking about. And if your designer didn't think about this stuff, you're leaving a lot on the table and you're probably not working with someone who understands this stuff to the level you want it. Okay. And when you think about that with your branding, like this is so simple, but so effective, right? It shows that he gets what he's talking about. And so if your show doesn't really create the same sort of feeling, then that's what you're missing out on, right? And he's only gotten better at this over time, but it's really, really crucial. That's why you can get growth so much faster when you understand this stuff. It starts with your overall show and the feeling that you're creating, but then it trickles over into how clips are edited, how thumbnails are created. It all has to come from a strong foundation. That's really what your show branding is. And if you haven't sorted that out, that's somewhat of a problem. So how can you make yours better, right? I want you to get into the mind of your potential viewer. If you're creating this content, you should be better at this than anyone on the planet. And if you aren't, then you can't expect the audience that you want. Straight case in point. This guy is winning because he gets all this stuff, but his content can also back it up. So it's multi-pronged, right? You need to understand this stuff because that's one signal that I should click this, right? But it only really grows if once they click it, they can see this guy actually cares. And there's a lot of people who they don't get both, right? They'll either work with someone like my agency and they'll get this stuff right, but then the content is shit because they don't actually care. It's got to be both. If you're not getting both, you won't get results like this. Plain and simple. So what he would have done is gone through and looked at other sorts of media that these people have watched, right? Look for common themes, common elements, room for improvement. So how do you create the feeling, but modernize the feeling to be unique, right? Steal Like an Artist is a very famous book. Essentially, it's taking from multiple pieces to create something new individually, right? Because it's a combination of multiple things. So it itself is technically new because it's a combination of multiple points of inspiration. That's what you should be doing for your branding as well, right? You need to be thinking about what else have they consumed? How can I leverage work that people have done before me to act as a beacon for when people see this? If you know, you know. And so if your branding doesn't do that, you've got some work to do. Build out an ideal viewer avatar of who is this show actually for, okay? And then start thinking about things that would have a lot of weight in terms of their positive associations to click something, in terms of your overall show branding, because you're going to be using that every single time. So you want that positive association. And then for thumbnails, which we'll get more into in the thumbnail video, negative associations, right? Because positive associations is for stay around, you're in the right place. Negative association is for action, right? Because if it's a negative thing, our fight or flight response kicks in. And so it's fear of loss. So we're going to click. That's why people in thumbnails and titles go negative almost all the time, because they're trying to spur on an action. They're playing our subconscious programming as humans and using it to their advantage. And you should be doing the exact same thing. That's just how it goes. People get mad and like, oh, this is evil that you know this stuff, or it's evil that you're using this stuff. That's how the world works. And so you either use it or you let the people who understand this stuff that are evil use it. If you're a good person, this is not evil. You're helping get your content in front of more people. It's an excuse. It's bullshit, but whatever. Back to the point. You should be focusing on positive associations for your branding because you're using that every single time. We want to make people feel at home, our people, right? Saying we understand their feelings, we understand the things they complain about, we understand all of that. And then leverage intrigue and fear in thumbnails and titles because we want the fear of missing out or the fear of loss. Fear in general is incredibly powerful, right? So that's what he leverages for almost all of these. And if you study other successful podcasts, that's what they're doing. They're leveraging fear of loss, fear of missing out. And if you understand your audience, that should be fairly simple. So a lot of people are making content and they're not thinking about any of this stuff and they're wondering why it doesn't work. You need to be thinking more like your customer or like your viewer and getting into their experience. Otherwise, you're missing out on opportunities to talk to them in all of your points of messaging. So if you look at other shows too, another good one, let's use Diary of a CEO. It's a solid example. When you go look at their stuff, it projects a feeling, right, of professionalism, education, but approachability is really why the show went so viral. Because yes, it looks high class, it looks professional, but the language used is deliberately approachable. What I mean by that is no one reading the titles and thumbnails is going to be scared away from clicking it. And so he understands what his goal of his show is. He's trying to reach a mass audience. If that's your goal too, then you need to communicate at a similar level of understanding, because every level you go higher with your communication and all this stuff, then you push people away. And we'll get more into that in titles and thumbnails. But for branding in general, is your branding delivering the intended feeling, right? Like even this banner, what does it do? It projects status. His show is all about status and quality, right? And so what does he do? He flexes that. What says my show is quality more than having on the most influential people in the world and making it look nice? Literally nothing. And how is he able to make his branding like this? It's because he understands what he's trying to do. Steven is a marketer through and through. And so he understands all of these little things, they have meaning. And so if you're not getting the results that you want, you haven't thought about this stuff. And the great news for you is that this doesn't have to be your branding. In fact, it shouldn't be your branding. Because if your show is more of a niche B2B based show, then what is the equivalent to display that you get it, right? People get so fixated on the what and not the why. And that is so problematic for marketing because it's all nuance. So think about, okay, so all these decisions that Steven is making, he's spending millions of dollars to execute the show to the highest level. What are the lessons that I can take from Steven and apply to my situation? And it's gonna take practice, but this channel is here to help you do all of these things. So make sure you click subscribe and hit the bell button. I'm gonna be posting way more frequently here. So this is clearly echoing, okay, I'm a very important figure. I'm in the center of this, and around me are some of the most influential people on the planet, very recognizable faces, right? That's saying so much. What is the equivalent for your show? What are the symbols or people or words that have the associated meaning that you want people to connect to your show? That should be thought about in design. And so if your designer didn't think about these things and just splash some colors together, or if you just use branding that you already had, that's probably not the best idea, because there's a lot more that you could be doing. And you can still use the same colors you're using, but modernize them to make sense and make them work for you. Another big thing that I see is that people choose branding that just doesn't work on YouTube. And so if you don't work with a YouTube designer and you try to make thumbnails from poor design fundamentals in terms of color combinations, that's why there's a lot of thumbnails and branding for podcasts that just look horrendous. And they wonder why they don't get growth. It's because it just looks bad. And naturally, when you're competing against people who are doing it right and you're not, you can't expect people to click your videos. People have choice. And naturally, you wouldn't click your video if it was side by side either, right? There's just not those subconscious boxes being checked. As I mentioned in the previous example, people are thinking constantly, let's go for the homepage, right? Of course, all this stuff is filtered for me, right? But as I'm scrolling through and I'm trying to pick this, and this would be true when people are scrolling on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, etc. They're just looking for little subconscious things that display that this is less likely to be a waste of their time. And so that's why when I gave the example of Area 52, all of these little inclusions of showing he understands what matters shows that I'm probably not wasting my time. And so you need to be doing that for your branding and your show, because it shows that you understand and you care. Sean Ryan's is another good one, right? He goes very intense. And so he definitely echoes that, because he's kind of basically branding himself as the guy who brings on these non-covered stories. They're very intense, very deep, whatever. And so he echoes that with his branding. It's really just create a feeling. And so all the best shows, if when you go and look at their stuff, their branding echoes the message that they're trying to say within the episodes. And so the final point for this is, if your branding doesn't do that, that's something that's got to be changed. Otherwise, it's going to be hard to grow. Next episode in the series is going to be all about thumbnails. So how to approach design fundamentals for thumbnails for podcasts. And if you need help with your thumbnails, you can go to podcastpackaging.com and get your first title and thumbnail 50% off. You can work directly with my team that has helped grow some of the largest podcasts on the planet. We have been across thousands of podcast episodes and podcasting content, and we can help you get your content in front of more of the right people. It's linked down below. Go give it a try and make sure to click subscribe, hit the bell button, and I'll see you in the next one.